Okay. Since we changed the rules when we took over, we'll now take questions aimed at the speakers. And that's, since because of the schedule change, going to run right into the panel discussions. So let's open the floor. Yes, sir.
Mike Nelson with Georgetown. I heard discussion of privacy and security. I don't think I heard the word transparency. And I think that's part of the equation here. If we build transparent systems, self-auditing systems, systems that allow the user to have a better sense of where their data is and how it's protected and who's getting access to it, we can resolve some of the privacy concerns. And we can also, I think, spot security problems a lot faster. When I was at IBM, we talked about autonomic systems, self-monitoring systems. It was a great bumper sticker, although nobody knew how to spell autonomic. Why aren't we talking more about this? Why aren't we talking more about self-monitoring systems that give users a sense of what's actually going on in the system so they can build trust that way?
One of the problems we have is scale. I'm working right now on a DHS project securing oil and gas pipelines. One strand of pipeline that goes from Galveston to Erie, Pennsylvania, about 3,500 miles as it wends its way around the country, has 14,000 or so sensors and actuators. At any time, approximately 10% of those sensors and actuators do not work. And there are people whose full-time job is to go from sensor to actuator to sensor to make sure they work. If they are offshore, they've got to schedule a helicopter ride. Now imagine shaving by looking in the mirror, except what you're seeing is where your face was 5 minutes ago. Okay? But they're driving pipelines with 10% perhaps of the data not accurate, or they don't know, dubious integrity. What they want is a situational awareness system, and we're working with Charles actually to get that. But it's a problem of scale. Can you imagine how much that's going to cost? And so yes, they want transparency just so that they know it's working, and then maybe they can think about protecting it. And that's what I was saying, these large-scale systems, there has to be some solution. Maybe, as Pav said, when you build them, you've got to have it.
There's some other issues with transparency having to do more with people and organizational boundaries. So when I'm submitting my information to a company, they currently are able to collect that information and sell it to someone else for marketing. And they don't want that seen because they don't want people to be objecting to it. That's a legal and economic issue. It's not a technical issue. And yeah, well, yes, but I mean, it's not something we can solve with technology. It's going to have to. It's something that's deeply embedded in our social and economic structure for that transparency. Then, as Suji said, it's a matter of scale, not only in size but in number of organizations participating that information transits through. And if we wanted, we could probably all here generate an expanded list of things such as smart self-protecting data is something that a lot of people have talked about as a potential solution area. But when we have all of these interconnecting systems, and now if you add the international constraints, it gets particularly nasty to try to negotiate.
Okay. Fred?
So this was a terrific panel, by the way, and it's really strikingly, it's clear there are very well-defined problems. It's clear there are compelling reasons to work on these problems. It's clear there are, shall we say, shovel-ready exploratory areas to look at. So, one question for all of you is, what is the issue? Why is this not more of a priority than it already is, than it should be?
Tell you what, you start. We'll go down a lot.
Yeah, you know, I really think it is a priority, and I think that priority has been reflected to the maximum extent that NSF, for example, could actually support it with the limited budget that they've had. And I see security, confidence, and trust built into many research programs where they welcome proposals that would reflect that sort of research in some other program area. And I think it's fundamentally a hard problem. As I said, we've been working on this unsuccessfully for 40 years, at least. And I think that although we've made some progress, it's been very incremental progress. There hasn't been that huge breakthrough. I heard the comment a minute ago on autonomic systems, and I think the real answer is it wasn't addressed because we only had 10 minutes each. But there are a lot of people that are looking at autonomic systems, for example, as a major research thrust, self-healing, self-defending sort of systems. But the hardness of that problem might come because in some instances, you can't afford to have the system make those sorts of decisions. It may cause something to blow up, or it may incorrectly decide to defend when it shouldn't, and there has to be a human in the loop. So those are fundamentally hard, and I think there has been a good deal of attention paid to it, and I think that's more budget-driven. I think the reason we haven't had more attention is more budget-driven than it is interest-driven.
So I haven't been working at this as long as Ray has. I've been involved for about 25 years in the field. And the things that I've seen are, first of all, many organizations view that it isn't their responsibility. And so it's up to the government, for instance, or it's up to the vendors. We used to have a number of standards that DoD used in procuring systems, and it was believed that it caused systems to get too expensive. Look at the systems we're buying now, but that the market would solve the problem. And in fact, what happened by letting go of the standards and dissolving some of the capability we had within the government for software engineering, management, and research, the problem's gotten worse. So part of it there is a lack of feeling that it's my responsibility. Second problem is mixed priorities within government or within industry. I don't want to share. I don't want to tell people where my vulnerabilities are. I don't want to expose that I've had incidents. So gathering data or experience is very difficult. I don't want you to see what my defenses are to see whether you could improve them. I don't want you to instrument my systems. So that makes it very difficult for research to proceed. And then the third is a matter of, in the marketplace, that organizations come down to, well, do I want to invest in security, or do I want to release something next quarter? If you look at what's happened to our financial system meltdown, we gave up controls because we'd make more money. It seems to be intrinsic in the way we approach things, and look at the mess it continues to get us in. So we really need to have a change in attitude to say, wait a minute, quality is more important in the long term than next quarter's profit.
I think bring it closer. It works. Just bring it closer.
Yeah, for cyber physical systems, I think it is indeed identified as PCAST report as one of the top sort of priority area, and this was somewhat unusual because this sort of the NIST system dealing with physical world was not one of the 8 areas in the previous report, and so this was last year report actually put this as one of the top new area. And NSF is currently has started some program, but it's very small. I think, as you can see, the cyber physical system there's some core component, but it is attached with the application area. For example, medical, then NIH come with it, and transportation, DOT has to come with it, and energy, DOE, and so on. But it has been quite difficult to open that up. Because the way I understand is government agencies have certain mission, and it's very difficult to coordinate them, to actually fund some joint projects.
Okay, let me add something to this. I think the solution also involves politics or policy and economics. It's easy to see why economics is involved. But let me share with you something about politics. 80% of America's infrastructure is in private hands. So how do we get the private sector to implement a security solution that we need so that we can continue to survive as a society? Because the next war is going to be a cyber war for sure. I mean, in addition to kinetic things. So what do? More regulation, less regulation? Who's going to pay for this? And then you look at different countries. Look at Israel and America. Democratic countries, both countries equally paranoid about terrorism. In Israel, critical infrastructure protection is completely government controlled. In America, it's completely free-for-all. And see, so there are these issues, and scholars are looking at them. You know, I don't think that we know the answers yet, and that's why it's so important in security to get this interdisciplinary viewpoint. I don't see a single person aside from you, Jane, who is not an engineer or a scientist, and I think that's not good.
Right, absolutely agree. A couple more points. Dave Oxsmith, who was Microsoft's chief security guy for a while, when, as usually happened to him, was wearing a target, and people started picking on him, his response was, look, people wanted dancing hamsters. We gave them dancing hamsters. We could have spent time on security. We could have spent time on implementing e-business. You know, we could have done lots of things, but people wanted dancing hamsters. So there you go. And now we're trying to do better. It comes down to return on investment, getting the companies interested in doing it, their ROI. And then one of the comments that came out last year was, until we can reach down into the grades, call it K through 16, I prefer, because there are students in my security and privacy class at Dartmouth who, at least when they showed up, they had no clue. We're trying to pound it into them. But it's amazing how little they think about all the things they append and put up on Facebook and so on. And we were discussing this on the bus last night. One of the good news things there is, while we all are bemoaning the fact that these kids do not take security personally, and we all know that's what it has to be. You have to take it personally. You have to treat that asset as your own money. They are beginning to get a clue, because there was a bunch of them who got angry at Facebook when they changed their rules of engagement. And there was a massive protest, and Facebook backed down, saying it was all a misunderstanding. It probably was. So there's some hope. But we have to give them some help. My first grader isn't quite ready to worry about where he's going on the net, but he sure wants to go. And I'm going to have to face that really soon. So, Mark.
I think there's been a thread which has been perhaps implied but not explicit throughout the discussion, which is I'd call perhaps just enough security. I recently built a system which was an internal IBM system, and one of my friends, for the fun of it, just broke it. And it would have been trivial to fix the security problem, but it would have made it less usable. The system was somewhat like a wiki, and I wanted community participation, and so there was a question of how do I allow anybody to change anything and yet not allow people to change things they're not supposed to. And so if you look at Wikipedia, the answer is it's fairly easy to revert. And so the notion of revert says it's not that you prevent somebody from doing something that they shouldn't, but you make it relatively easy to recover from. And that's an example of sort of just enough security. It's how do you handle the problem of making something usable without the security imposing a penalty. There's an allied notion of just enough privacy. One of the things my father concluded when he was dying is he didn't care about the privacy of his medical records anymore. He would have been perfectly happy if some doctor who wasn't supposed to look at it looked at it. Didn't matter. And so, I think we have to balance the needs of the ease of the system against the prevention of the evildoers from doing things. And I think that's a security problem at a higher level. you have to change the application structure in order to enable that. It's not, you're not going to the network level and preventing Wikipedia from being damaged. You're taking the semantics of Wikipedia and saying, the way I'm going to do this is a log file that's easy to revert.
So this is something that I can tell you many of us have heard repeatedly, and it's why some systems are designed the way they are. And you are right that we don't need the best security in every system. So normally, as Charles said, if we had more time and we were to expand on this, we normally teach it in the sense of risk mitigation. So you evaluate the threats, you determine what the value of the assets are, and you build in or turn on enough security, because it's an economic activity. You can never have perfect security. You've got to spend enough. But part of the problem is that the people evaluating that don't understand what's at risk, and some risks are bigger than others. And the second is they don't always know where what they're building is going to be deployed. So somebody who's writing a device driver for an operating system may not know where that operating system is going to be used, and that's part of the problem. So certainly for your system, you could roll back. If it was command and control for a missile launch, rollback is a little more difficult.
Sure. But the point I'm making is that I think that there are clever ways of allowing you to have security without getting in the way of the functioning of the system. And that's figuring out what those clever ways is something that I think it's important to look at, as well as, in a device driver, the device driver ought to be secure. We know what that means. There's no collaborative thing amongst the device driver, probably, where a security hole would ever be used by a good guy, right? But in Wikipedia, a security hole is used by a good guy every day. In fact, it's mostly used by good guys.
What I'm saying is that we understand that, who work in this arena, and that's why there is a range of different things that you can do, like passwords, biometrics, smart cards, and you can tailor your solution for the level of risk involved. The problem we have is that there are people marketing systems who make assumptions about where things are being used. We don't know how to measure the risk, and in some cases we don't even know how to measure the security properties. So you are correct that there should be a range, and we should train people in deploying the range, and some of us do that, but we have an insufficient tool set to do that for everything.
Well, right-sizing security is not a new topic. And just as our previous VP used to turn up the security on his system and just to see what would happen, he usually got the same answer. A whole lot of nothing happened after a while. A lot of times, though, it's kind of hard to add security. If you didn't design for it initially, right-sizing security is hard. You end up having to do the heavy-handed stomp that we end up most of the time now, as opposed to having the system ready and enabled, giving you a way to hook into the authentication or to hook into identity verification and so on. So it all goes back to trying to do it right the first time. And we don't get that opportunity very often. So, yes, sir?
Eric Mattel, I'm the chief scientist with Sparta's National Security Systems sector, and I joined Sparta as a result of Sparta's acquisition of McAfee Research in 2005, which I led. The current paradigm that exists in terms of and focus of trying to secure systems is putting us, the nation that is, at risk in very, very important and not very subtle ways. I can bring to mind a number of things that I have read in the open press. For my government colleagues, I'm talking about things I've seen in the open press now. A message that I think NITRD needs to send back is that when the president talks about the fact that we're at war, that we're currently engaged in 2 wars, I agree, but I think that's wrong. I think we are engaged in 3 wars. We're winning in Iraq, pulling troops out by next October. That's good. Afghanistan's going a little bit worse than that. we're losing the cyber war. And I'm not talking about the things that are easily seen in the commercial or commercial market space, or the things that you typically see on your laptop when you're at home. But I'm talking about, for example, things that have been events that have occurred within the defense industrial base or within the university research base, where large wholesale theft of intellectual property has been exercised recently, and more importantly, where the nature of protocols as they currently exist within the net have been used for intelligence purposes, and indeed are being used to thumbprint the deployment of naval carrier battle groups. So just among other things, right? So it is very real. It is very, very complicated, as you rightly say. I think we're at a juncture where we need to start to train a new generation of students not to build safe software, but to build software that can fight in a dirty world and still conduct its job. We have to establish a radically different frame of reference as we start to think about these things. We have a network-based distributed system today that we feel comfortable with. Right? When we go out into the roads, we drive, we see a policeman driving down the road, we have no problem with that. There's no beat cop in cyberspace. There's nobody there to detect the bad guy and to protect you, the citizen, from what the bad guy is doing to you right now. We probably need to rethink that. We need to think about privacy. We need to think about anonymity, because by providing or maintaining anonymity, we create protocols that allow the network to exploit too many things, too many facets of our work. We need to think about the notion of exploitation of emerging hardware roots of trust in creating a trusted infrastructure that goes down into the dirt at a hardware level, through operating system services, through applications that understand the notion of that trust and can be exploited to meet the trust requirements of the user in the user's environment. And that is an extremely difficult problem. More importantly, we need, again, more and better theoretical models that allow us to reason about that entire process as we move up and down those chains. Okay. In conclusion, we are at war in cyberspace, and we're losing.
So I think over here, Ray and I exchanging notes, and we agree. Two elements of that. Certainly in the context of what we've talked about for the last 2 days, we are talking about building better interconnections of our systems, higher speed networks, better access. For whom? That's part of the problem, is that the more capacity we add, the more we endanger the country if we aren't thinking about security as a first order property. And the second one is just as an aside on roots of trust. I believe that 6 of the 7 current versions of TPMs that are manufactured are all manufactured outside the United States in factories that are controlled in other countries, and we don't necessarily know what's inside those chips.
I think if you address what is inside those chips, and if you look at detailed reports, you're going to be very upset with the findings.
I know.
Very good. So, sure. Okay, just one comment there. When people say we're at cyber war, it's not just someone in another country twiddling our power system. It's not just the example that came from the panel here from Gene. It's also what happened to lots of systems all over the country from your own business, the Conficker worm, and what it did to the French Air Force, and what it's doing to systems around the country, around the world. maybe that was not the perp's original intention. Doesn't matter. It's another aspect of the war. So we have several fronts, the obvious ones and the not so obvious ones. And your beat cop, I agree, there's nobody watching. Of course, it's a little different world. It's easier to define what that beat cop is going to be watching for. It's a little hard to define what, if we had one, he would watch for here. Intrusion detection is a great example. As long as you've got a list of every possible thing that could ever go by that was bad, then you win. Constructing that list is, well, job security.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that we have to change the way that we train the next generation. But I think we are fighting a much bigger war that we are losing. And that is building dependable, reliable software infrastructure. Where security is, it's very important, but it's just a piece of it. We don't train our students to think about what can go wrong and what are the vulnerabilities. When, I don't know if you heard about the story about a first-time glider that went out from the plane with an instructor on his back, the first time, and the instructor was supposed to teach him how to do it, and the instructor died while on his back, and he had to figure out how to do the whole thing on his own. This is what we have to teach our students when they write software. Because I think that if you write a control system, the attack can come from the inside. It's not only that somebody's sitting on a mountain in a beautiful picture and all this kind of thing, holding some kind of a device that can attack your system. And if you don't build it from the bottom up, thinking about what happens if somebody managed to get to my machine, or somebody misbehaves, and in many cases the problem may not be malicious, but they will still bring down the system. Maybe they will not steal your IP, but you will lose tremendous amount of time, effort, and all that. But we don't teach this. We teach our students to write software that runs fast, not that works. So unless we fundamentally change the way we think about it, we ask our students to provide threat models to their software, whether the threat is malicious or just a stupid piece of software that does a denial of service attack. From my perspective, these are the same. Now, the other aspect that I want to bring up here is that the trust has to go deeper than just, how should I say, the technical trust, who signed your certificate and all this. It is, how much do I trust the piece of software that you are bringing to the table? And how much do I trust you, for example, that you will be there when I need you to give me a new release, to support me, and all these other aspects. So the trust is much, much, much deeper than what we like to consider when we talk about the technology. How many bits are used for the signature? And again, I don't think that this is covered anywhere. We don't ask people who submit proposal to build a system, what is your trust model? And what are you going to do if the trust breaks? So the problem that we are facing here are much more fundamental than any of the technology issues.
Okay, I'm going to jump on that one. That last point is one of the stickiest wickets out there, and that is warranting software. I'm sure all of you have at one point or another read one of those infamous EULAs, end-user license agreements. All companies do them, and they all basically say this software is not guaranteed to do anything in particular. And that's lawyer speak. I don't know what it is. But we don't have any way of doing that warranty thing. And that's something that came up in a very heated discussion between the industry and the consumers. Consumers saying, gosh, darn it, quit telling me to buy the latest thing. Help me fix what I've got. And then the vendors saying, well, golly gee, if you had a clue, you could do what you have a whole lot better. And it got ugly. So addressing that is a very tricky problem. How do you motivate the vendors? And as Gene said earlier, you can motivate a vendor by telling him that he's going to make some sales. But if you tell a vendor it's the right thing to do for God and country, then they think about it. And they may do it anyway, but they think about it. So, sure. Oh, okay.
I don't mean to hold you up, but I did want to say a couple of things. There were several questions in your comments there. I'm sure most everybody in this room is aware that the federal government, through something called the Cyber Corps, has been trying to fix the problem of information assurance curriculums in schools. Sujit participates in that, I participate in that, and probably others in this room do. While it's not perfect, there is a significant interest. In fact, the big guy sitting behind you back there was a program manager for that program for a while. Staff participates in it. There's a program to try to bring information assurance to our students by weaving that topic throughout the curriculum and also focusing on courses that are specific to secure software engineering. And I think that's having some impact, and I think that we are producing thousands of students as a result of that program annually. But before you comment on that one, I know you'll disagree with that, but I personally think that that program is having a very good impact. The other comment I want to make is more of just sharing with you some frustrations that I've had for the last 8 months in trying to get a vendor to do what's right for God and country. We discovered some very serious vulnerabilities in software that controls nuclear power plants and power grids and things that all of us have an interest in. Without naming the company, we decided to report that through Department of Homeland Security and then to the company, thinking that if these vulnerabilities, which were serious and easily exploitable, and in fact we had evidence that they were being exploited, that the vendor would certainly want to fix those. It turns out that was a naive thought process, and that the vendors really aren't interested in fixing those, and more concerned about market share and obfuscating the reporting process so that market share isn't impacted. So over a period of about 8 months, we had 4 conversations with the lead software engineer about why it's a bad idea to use a fixed length password key that you exclusively OR against your password and hide your password that way. It's very easy to reverse engineer something like that, as everybody in this room understands. We tried to have conversations of why it's a bad idea to have your security DLL in user space, so that by using a hex editor, you go out and change a branch instruction, and now anybody can log in, not just the authorized user, and a number of other vulnerabilities like that. Poor software engineering. So after 4 phone calls, and each one of the phone calls basically said, how can I patch this? And the conversation was that you cannot patch this. These are fundamental architectural issues that need to be redesigned. So we went from a how can I patch this to how can I stop you from reporting this, to the point where we had lawyers involved, my friends, suggesting that, you cannot reverse engineer our code, you're violating our copyrights, you can't look at the vulnerabilities, you can't report the vulnerabilities, and that sort of thing. It took 8 months to get that vulnerability out, and it was only after we showed them certain foreign websites that already had cracks against those vulnerabilities published, and the fact that the user community, the nuclear power plants and such, did not know about those, and they needed to mitigate those vulnerabilities. So it's not an easy problem to solve, and it's not easy to get the vendors to come on board. So those were really, I think, 2 responses to 2 questions that I heard you suggest.
Yeah. Let me reiterate that I don't speak about the vendors. I speak about the software that we are using to build our science infrastructure. And when I look around at what I find when I have to hire somebody, or I look at software that was developed in academia, I don't see any traces to any program that improves the awareness of whoever does the work to security, containment of breaches, any of these things. Maybe they are expert in hashing techniques and key generation, but I don't consider that to be the main problem that we are facing. So if I have to look somewhere else, or I can find these people that are being trained, I'll be the first one to be interested in it. But what I see coming out, and what I have to use to build our national research infrastructure, I think we have a problem.
Okay, agreed. I don't think there's any disagreement there. There was a follow-up here with Fran.
Well, no.
Fran had jumped in.
Sorry.
Fran sounds like
Mark and I are having some sort of a,
Contention, yes.
yeah, we've become the same person. One of the things, maybe not. One of the things I was really interested in hearing you say is this notion of good enough. And, in some sense, as the world becomes more complex, this notion, and the notion that you can, essentially never achieve optimal, sort of forces us in a good way into this, what is good enough? What is sufficient to get what we've done? What is sufficient to make the cost or threat to benefit ratio, work out for you? And in fact, we live with this same issue in the data world. There is no such thing as 100% never ever data loss. So what is good enough for very high reliability? And that's a very sophisticated notion. I think that if we can quantify in terms of the value, the economic model associated with each level of value, et cetera, very important. And in fact, for security, one would imagine there are certain instances which, if something didn't work out, it's roughly okay. Other instances where if it doesn't work out, it's disastrous. And quantifying the difference between those are very useful. I mean, this seems to be a place where the community, back to, I think, what I said in the first day, in some sense you can optimize for what you can measure. And being able to measure this kind of thing is tremendously important. Be interested in hearing your all comments on this.
Well, as we mentioned, metrics keeps coming up again and again, and we don't have good metrics. We aren't sure exactly what to measure. We don't have good visibility into where all the places that code may end up being used. This is an area that there should be some priority research given. And I think I think I can speak for not only my colleagues here, but others who teach in this area. When we teach these things, we show where the theoretical maximums are possible, but then we say you evaluate a situation and you build in defenses, you build in recovery, you build in risk shifting and alternatives to what you do. That's part of security architecture. And that's fundamental to the kinds of things that we normally teach. But as was noted, it isn't taught a lot of places because there isn't a lot of expertise.
Yeah, sure.
In my opinion, a really good solution is to look at managing risk. When the Soviets were in Afghanistan, a lot of Russians died from tropical diseases. So when our soldiers went there, they were instructed to wash their hands and wash their hands often, and they had antibiotic things to use and stuff like that. And I think that there needs to be an equivalent of a public health awareness campaign for this, sort of like what the Surgeon General had for AIDS, which was quite controversial at the time. So I think at some level we got to look at a public health kind of solution so we can deal with maybe 95% of all the problems. Now again, that's not 100%, but still we can deal with a large number of problems. And then maybe we should allocate resources, because I don't think we are going to solve this problem in, 10 lifetimes, because our systems are too complex. We can just look at managing risk, and in the meantime we hope that our ethical standards and our structures improve so that we don't wage war, we don't do bad things. So it's kind of like taming the Wild West, I guess. You can't just have marshals everywhere. But again, a public health campaign with some directed investment and managing risk might do the job.
Okay.
I'd like to say that security is very important, but this is one of the attributes in quality of service. It's the way I see it. So there are the safety issues and sort of timeliness issue. There are lots of other issues we need to worry about. And one thing that I like to point out is in sort of medical device domain, security has not been considered a whole lot at the moment because most of the devices are standalone device. Now it's increasingly sort of being connected to the internet and with other systems. So there's a lot of sort of new challenging aspect as to how to add the security, how to evaluate, how to FDA can approve the sort of the more broad sort of the quality of service or the fitness of the system. And so I think this is sort of opening up new area for those cyber-physical systems.
Yeah, recalling 500,000 pacemakers is one thing, but sending out patches every Tuesday for them, I don't think I want to go there. Yes?
Past 1.5, 2 decades is the story of transforming systems, and computing information technology really became the universal system integrator. If you look now how large systems are built, aerospace systems, process control systems, automotive systems, healthcare systems, everywhere everything is glued together with networking and information technology. Now, it means that suddenly the related disciplines, computer engineering, software engineering, and the foundations, computer science, finds themselves in a very precarious situation because they are becoming responsible for the safety and security of these very large systems. If they fail, the failures will propagate out to physical behaviors, can cause tremendous damage. And frankly, that kind of convergence, which is created by that, convergence across control engineering, software engineering, systems engineering, is everywhere in the systems industry, but it's very early stage in education and in the disciplinary organization. So I guess it creates really a gigantic challenge on us. How can we facilitate that convergence in terms of the deconstructing the disciplinary boundaries and deconstructing the organizational boundaries across these different groups of students, what we create in the engineering schools. So I would very much interested to hear any kind of experience that can be copied in this area.
I think we have a little bit of a challenge on precisely the question. So if you could just hit the question.
Where are the good models? Is there any good models for achieving that convergence? Convergence in terms of fusing computer engineering, systems engineering, control engineering type of programs.
Bringing all those...
Anyone knows about these kind of integrative approaches in education, in engineering schools?
You're bringing all those disciplines together to focus on...
Yes, getting them closer. Basically, I told Spep that you guys are doing it, so that's why I brought it.
Well, we're doing a little of it. We're trying to bring people together, although it's basically unfunded and at the sort of the interest level of whoever wants to participate for that kind of integration. It just isn't. It doesn't exist. Again, security has not been a first-rate concern for organizations, and so many of us have been trying. I know Sujit has been doing this in his program, Ray in his, Matt Bishop out at Davis. There are a number of places where we've been trying to build this kind of curriculum and expand it, but there aren't the resources, and there doesn't seem to be the support to try to spread this across different disciplines. Maybe as a result of this, we can get a little bit of change.
Yeah, it's the multidisciplinary nature that you're faced with. Yeah, so we're certainly trying to do that at the I3P with our members, spanning, law and behavioral science, computer science, security, engineering, but still, it's really hard. It's just as hard to get a banker to understand some aspects of cybersecurity as it is to get the guy building the power system.
Largely doing it without funding.
And without funding. And the other challenge you have also is our power systems in particular. I mean, people may be the ultimate critical infrastructure, but power is right up there. And if you talk to the power folks, as Martin Wyborn did at Dartmouth, he found the guy very interested in learning more about cybersecurity and how he could use cyber physical systems to improve his productivity. But then he said, but you know, I'll have to get back to you on that because we're having enough trouble keeping the wires off the ground. When you've got a physical infrastructure that is itself unsteady or in constant repair, it's hard for these folks to find the investment or even the brain cycles to think about it. Of course, we may have a Sputnik event. Who knows if we will or if that would make any difference. Some people thought Estonia was going to do that, but not so much. Oh, yeah, you have a question?
Well, in some sense, I was going to ask about the Sputnik event.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it seems to me, I mean, I know that there has been a lot of work on this in the last 40 years. I mean, that's completely clear. It's also clear that the amount of work is not keeping up with the rising complexity of the challenge. And it also seems clear to me that there has not been a movement either in computer science education or software engineering education to really address this or to completely rethink how we design systems. And even though there are places that are doing that, and I think doing it in really interesting ways, it's not, as far as I know, it hasn't made it into the computer science curriculum efforts in a major way. And, you know, I'm really wondering whether it takes a 9/11 to sort of shake things up enough that we take it seriously.
So that's a very provocative question. Did 9/11 make things better? Anyone fly here?
Well, I think it probably didn't, but it actually, I don't think it made it safer.
No.
And it certainly didn't make flying more convenient.
No. It certainly rose awareness. That's why I raised the Estonia thing. I mean, for the first year or so after Estonia happened, you couldn't go to a conference where some member of the government of Estonia wasn't there talking about what happened. And usually the story was similar, not always. Any other comments on?
Well, it may be, rather than a single big event, it may be the accretion of a number of large events. So, for instance, we've now had 2 large credit card processors leak their entire database to criminals who broke into the system remotely. And the loss there is in the tens of millions, if not larger. As those losses begin to mount, and as some of those companies are being held to answer for those, that may begin to cause some economic pressure. Is probably the only way that we're going to get some change, is if we start holding organizations responsible. So far, that hasn't happened at the federal government level, but states are beginning to exert control with Massachusetts and I think it's Nevada now with very strict financial liability laws for data breaches. And so we're beginning to see some movement in that direction. That may help.
Yep. Right. Okay. Mark, you've been very patient, and then to you.
Yeah, well, I'm going to tee up a question and suggest we table it. But I think Sujit suggested an important topic for us to discuss, which is what's an inspiring grand challenge. And I would posit that an inspiring grand challenge probably is validated by the existence of something rather than the probable non-existence of something. And so the probable non-existence of a security breach probably is not an inspiring grand challenge that's going to motivate people. I think that there are a bunch of other characteristics we could think about that that describe a grand challenge. I suspect it's one that's recognized where you can recognize by a 1 or a 0 whether or not you've succeeded. The war against cancer we devoted a substantial amount of money to, And in fact, we've made tremendous strides. People die of cancer much less often, but they still die of cancer, so we didn't succeed, so it wasn't inspiring. But I think we ought to talk about what are potential grand challenges and what makes a grand challenge. And I think that that's a worthwhile discussion to have, but it probably has nothing to do with security. But I do think that we ought to allocate some time to it someplace, somehow.
I think that is a good question, though, and maybe we don't have time here, but what one thing could we do?
Well,
Could Gene or Ray's team?
I think before we think about the one thing we could do, we should figure out what the characteristics of that one thing need to be in order to say we found a sufficient grand challenge. Because I think that there are concerns that you have with grand challenges. I mean, there were other grand challenges. Building an atomic bomb. I mean, we talked about people being rocket scientists. We talked about people being atomic scientists. Those were the grand challenges that really caught the popular imagination. I don't think we've talked about any other kind of scientists since then, so we clearly haven't gotten that level of challenge since. But, yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know what makes a great grand challenge, but we ought to think about it.
Any comments?
Actually, I was hoping that we would discuss this over the past 2 days, but I guess we haven't.
Well, we have 40 minutes.
Yeah. No, seriously, discuss it. I mean, what do you think would make a great grand challenge?
Okay, let's go back to the wheat example that I mentioned. Dwarf wheat was important because they wanted high yields. So if the stalks were too tall, the wheat stalks were going to bend, and the field was not going to be productive. And I was reading about Norman Borlaug and what he did, and they started with these requirements, but their goal was we're going to create. I think they called it the Green Revolution or something. And I think in agronomy in those days, I think that was a grand challenge. So I think we ought to look at something like.
So I hate to disagree with you because I think the Green Revolution was a spectacular success, but it's not inspiring people. It's one of these things where they made it better, right? And that ought to be enough. I mean, the guys involved in that should get all the fame and fortune and whatever that we can heap on them, and they haven't, and I don't know how to do it. And I suspect it was because of the challenge that they faced, and it's not that all of our money should go to grand challenges. Clearly, putting a man on Mars didn't make it. I think that when you mentioned that, I started thinking about Sue's comment, and could we make a self-driving automobile? Would that constitute a grand challenge? And I think it would be really tough. And I don't think that the laws would change to let the thing on the road, right? So we could succeed at the scientific thing, and it would die. And that would kind of be boring. One of the things that was interesting about putting a man on the moon is we didn't need to violate any laws in order to put a man on the moon. I mean, the moon was up there. It didn't have any commercial significance. I suspect, I don't know, I fear that anything which has direct commercial impact as opposed to secondary impact is probably not viable as a grand challenge, though I'd love to be proven wrong. I mean, it's not like the moonshot didn't have significant commercial impact. People talk about, the computer science was advanced dramatically by that. I don't know whether that's true, but it's probably true to some extent. But that wasn't the goal. So you weren't competing directly with commercial entities. If you tried to make a self-driving automobile or probably anything that's useful, there's going to be some company that thinks the government's competing with you. So, I mean, I don't know what the characteristics of a grand challenge are. Okay. I've only been thinking about it for 10 minutes.
How about something like in the movie Inner Space? The really small device that travels, that courses the bloodstream and everything. In the movie Inner Space.
I didn't see the movie, but I can imagine.
The Fantastic Voyage, or what,
yeah.
Remake.
Well,
something
if we could figure out how to
combine
shrink people, I think that would be great.
Not people. No, not people. Just machines. Just automatic. And now that would combine material science. It would combine healthcare. It would combine.
But how do you know when you've succeeded? What's the binary task that
Here's a grand challenge for you.
use the microphone?
Yep.
That's another grand challenge. Well, decent audio.
Right. What about moving to an entirely electric economy? I mean, you'd know when you'd done it.
You'd never have done it.
Well, how
People
about,
are still going to burn wood in their fireplace.
okay, how about we say, let's move transportation only to an entirely electric economy? You'd know.
Yeah, and classic car owners are going to be unhappy. I mean, you're never going to completely do it. I mean, yes, look, the internet is...
Okay, I'll rephrase it in the following way. How about if every new automobile sold by 2020 is all electric? You'd know.
Maybe that counts. I mean, I'm not convinced that counts. I mean, I don't understand what captures popular imagination well enough. Maybe that counts. Maybe that, but, you know, are there other things that we should be thinking about?
Well, I think if you look at the marketplace, the things that capture public imagination don't really fit well with science and technology.
Come on, people would have said putting a man on the moon is just engineering. It's not science. And there's some truth to that, but it had a lot of impact.
Well, we're in an area where it's both science and engineering. We know principles for building better systems, but they're expensive, and so they're not used. And there's no penalty for not using them. That's one of the biggest...
I started out saying that I don't believe security is a viable place to look for an inspiring mission. I'm sorry. I mean, you know, it's not that you guys shouldn't be paid. It's not that you shouldn't get fame and fortune. But I don't think that the lack of a break is going to be an inspiring mission.
I think that's an interesting thought.
That isn't the goal. The goal is to be able to have some confidence to do the things we want to do. It's not necessarily to prevent all possible instances.
Even if you could stop Bernie Madoff from existing, the lack of the Bernie Madoffs is just not inspiring. I'm sorry.
All right, well, let's take that as a given, and we'll give up on security. We can end the session, and we don't need to do anything else.
Certainly, grand challenges, I think, is a great idea. It's just not, like you said, it's not clear that there's one specifically here.
Right. So. But, I mean, amongst everybody in the room, there ought to be. And maybe security is a part of it. But it's not, it isn't it in the end goal.
Yeah.
I think.
But where you put it, it's very difficult to, So like in the CPS community, so we've been talking about what might be a grand challenge. One thing that has been come up is, say, sort of the zero energy building, or blackout-free power distribution and generation. But these are all sort of not fitting into your scheme because it's not trying to do something new that hasn't been thought about. So it's very difficult to think of something that we haven't thought about doing it, and it will bring all the sort of research challenges. But these are, I think, still like blackout-free power generation and distribution is a great challenge.
Yep. Okay.
I just one more comment. I think that a decent grand challenge might be to envision that the average user of the internet can use their machines safely and securely without the fear of somebody doing something bad to them. And if something bad to them happens, they have some retribution available to them through the law or by some international agreements where the person doing the bad thing, which could be spam or could be threats or could be spying on them, on their buying habits or their viewing habits, that could be addressed. Today we have none of that. Your mother that lives at home with you and uses the computer could very easily have their bank account drained by someone in Romania, and they have to worry about that when they use the machine. And I think we have a long way to go before we can provide that kind of safety and secure feeling for users of the home computer.
Okay, so let's wrap this one up with Fran.
So I'm going to help Mark out by cutting off his rant for a little bit. I think grand challenges are actually exactly the way to go, because then you start out with something that's inspiring and sort of backwards engineer. Arguably, every one of our communities, with all due respect to the folks in our room, have spent a lot of time thinking about what those grand challenges might be. But, let me humbly propose that we already have a set of very strategic, well-aligned grand challenges that NITRD can actually do something about, and those are the ones that Obama has proposed for what he wants to happen with this country. So take something like health IT. What are the grand challenges? Somebody ought to articulate something like any of us should be able to walk into any emergency room in the country and have an up-to-date electronic medical record that somebody can pull up and picosecond, pick your favorite, very small amount of time. One can take those particular challenges for which there is a lot of national energy and momentum, which require tremendous amounts, because we're not there yet, of evolutionary information technology research and development. Those are a good place to start, and there's already energy from the top, momentum from the top around those. I think if we could articulate what it means to even address those grand challenges, that would be very useful.
Yeah.
So I have
All right.
one in this healthcare, one proposal. The one possible the grand challenge can be location-independent access to world-class medicine. So this is more positive, which doesn't have this negativity. So maybe, and this relates to this healthcare.
Super set.
Okay. There were 4 grand challenges that were formulated at a workshop that was sponsored by the Computing Research Association a few years ago, and I was one of the chairs of that workshop. And one of those was to have dependable, secure online access to large-scale systems for societal needs, such as medical records or voting. So that was one of the 4 challenges. One of the other ones certainly would be near and dear was we set a date, and it's going to be missed, which was the elimination of self-propagating malware and spam on the network. And I think a lot of people would like to see that. Take a lot of effort to go towards it. And there were others, and you can find it if you do a search on the web. Yeah, security metrics was the number 1. Having something that would allow you to know what to invest and how much to invest for your security. And I would just add that there is actually a security grand challenge, but it's not ours. The Chinese, which is to thoroughly compromise and destroy the U.S. government. They're making very good progress on it. We're not doing very well on the defense.
All right, on that note, let's close out the grand challenge for now and go with the blue shirt whose name I can't see.
Scott Lintelman from the Boeing Company. I think that's a good segue to aerospace cyber-physical systems. These systems are currently being deployed now. So in the aerospace industry, you can look at it like it's 20 years behind the rest of the industry, right? So now is the time when the airplanes are being integrated into the information technology infrastructure. So this is a tremendous opportunity. A lot of these systems, they have to rely on COTS software and open source software as well. So what I would like help and guidance and understanding is how to do it, how to measure the trustworthiness of these systems end to end. How do we measure, not only measure the trustworthiness of the systems end to end, but communicate the trustworthiness or lack of thereof to executives and management. And this is a worldwide challenge, right? It's not just a Boeing challenge, it's an Airbus challenge as well, and an aviation challenge in general. It's a European Union challenge. So, and this is an area that is not classified. This is an area that involves the public. So this is a situation where you could leverage the talent from all over the world to try to solve a problem that would benefit everyone. And I think at least in my mind, it has some, it's an appealing grand challenge.
Comments?
So I was just wondering if there were any, your thoughts on being able to quantify, measure, and explain end-to-end trustworthiness for that type of cyber-physical system.
End-to-end within the plane, or?
No.
The entire...
Because you want to, there's a business desire to leverage information technology in general for the airplane. So you have airplane health management, you have air traffic management, advanced concepts of that, where the airplane is, more and more data is going back and forth from the airplane as the airplane traverses multiple security domains throughout the world. So if you were able to measure trustworthiness end to end, you could enable a lot of business models that are desirable not only to Boeing, but to a lot of other companies as well.
Yeah, that's a whopper. Stu is wrinkling his nose.
Let me just... let me come back, I think, to Fran's comment that inventing grand challenges is hardly necessary. We have likely ahead of us a large number of $10+ billion investments in things we don't actually know how we're going to get done, like the health record initiative, the smart grid, and so forth. If any of them were to be done right, it would be a wonderful computing grand challenge. And, for example, you may paste the word security, trustworthiness, and privacy attached to on the line after the first one, and you have a challenge that would be truly grand. I don't think we need to create any, since those are going to be funded, and the past experience will say that we'll do them badly, and it'd be nice not to.
You try to get it right the first time.
Yeah.
What a new idea. More questions? Still have 20 minutes.
But nobody ever really responded to the can you measure the assurance of the system, and I think the right answer is no. We're not able to do that. We've been trying to do that for years. Some of us refer to that as a composability problem. There is a government process out there today that looks at assurance in a particular product, not an entire system, but a particular product, and gives you, and this is an ISO standard, but it gives you an assurance level on a scale of 1 to 7 of where that particular product stands. But we don't field individual products. We field systems. And so when you put a 1, 3, and a 5 together, what do you have? And there's no algebra that solves that today. And so the answer, I think, is no. We don't know how to measure assurance in an end-to-end system.
So perhaps we should run down the panel for any final comments. That was a very good one, right? Anything else to add on that? Just overall?
That was a good one.
Okay, Gene?
I'd like to return to something I said earlier that hasn't come up here, in that I think that the real issue is fundamentally one of quality at its heart, because as we deploy more of these systems, and certainly what we're talking about with cyber-physical systems, where you have unexpected failures, and quoting Charles Perrault, who's written on this for many years, studied, we have these emergent properties, the kinds of things that are studied at the Santa Fe Institute and elsewhere, where we put things together and they fail. And they fail for unexpected reasons. And we have things that fail and aren't necessarily security problems, but maybe they are. So the next time that your system comes up with a blue screen, is that because somebody attacked it, or some malware, or did the software just hit a limit and die? So what I'd really like to say is if we can put this in the context of what we build with these national healthcare systems, or any of the other systems we're building, let's try to do it with quality that has the characteristics involved that we're thinking about possibility of failures, whether accidental or malicious. and that we're building systems to defend against those, to compensate for those, that are balanced according to risk and cost, that include the possibility of user error. Security is a property out of all of those things that need, and the solutions are very often combined. So we have a driving force because there are malicious entities and we do lose money, but we also lose an awful lot because of unexpected failures. And as we make our systems more complex and we rely on them more for aviation, for power, for healthcare, for whatever else, we stand to lose more. So it's really important that we start building this culture of thinking about quality first.
Okay. Insa?
So I think this sort of notion of a cyber-physical system really brings in lots of sort of the commonality for the future applications, whether we study or invest on cyber-physical system per se, there will be people who are going to build the next generation, power grid, and all these things. And they will all try to solve problem on their own. So I think it's very important for all of us to put the energy together and try to understand and complement each other to advance the sort of the knowledge and technology and sort of scientific foundation of what we call cyber-physical systems.
Charles asked if I had a last word. Actually, I have struggled. I can come down to two words. One is availability, and the other one is resilience.
Always a tough act to follow. My few words are critical infrastructure, the people, and coordination. You have a great opportunity. It may even be in your responsibility. Let's do it. So with that, thank you for your time and your questions, and I turn it back over to Chris.